All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast. You guys heard that call from Brian Custer calling one of the many three-pointers in St. John's upset win over Creighton on Sunday the 1st. Joining me today, the host of the Seeing Red podcast, a St. John's alum, probably one of the biggest St. John's supporters out there, Troy Mauriello. Troy, welcome. How are you?
I'm not bad, Mike. Thank you for having me on. I'm doing a little bit better after that game yesterday, so feeling good.
Yeah, a little inside podcast, and we're recording, basically setting up for this after the St. John's big 20-point blowout over Creighton at Carnesecca on Sunday. I have to say, that might be one of the most shocking lines of the year, seeing how those two teams are playing going into that game.
Yeah, absolutely. Creighton was on fire, and St. John's, really worst three-point shooting team in the Big East. They come out, they hit almost 70% of their threes. Creighton, one of the better shooting teams in the country, really can't make a three, and guess that's the recipe for a 20-point win for the Red Storm. But yeah, absolutely came out of nowhere.
Came out of nowhere. I will say Carnesecca was rocking.
Yeah, that was. I hope that they start playing some more Big East games at Carnesecca. That was the first top 10 win that they've had there since 1975. I would like to start playing some more games there. Maybe not the Villanovas and Seton Halls and Georgetowns, but Creighton especially, Marquette, Xavier, all those type of Big East teams. It'd be nice to play more games at Carnesecca Arena because it gets very, very loud.
Yeah, because I noticed this. I know the Garden has the prestige factor of we're playing at the Mecca, it appeals to recruits and whatnot, but the atmosphere there is not the same as it is at Carnesecca.
No, absolutely not. It's almost a neutral site game. I've been at almost every home game this season in Big East play. Games against Seton Hall, games against Villanova, they're basically neutral site games because all those teams fans come in and invade the building. And yes, you're getting 16, 17,000 people in the building. But when half of them are the opposing team's fans, how much of a home court advantage does that really give you? And how alluring is that to recruits, seeing that and knowing that a lot of these fans aren't really yours, whereas at Carnesecca Arena, you're only getting maybe 6,000 people, but it's a sellout crowd, and it's all St. John's fans. So that's the difference there. Like you said, the atmosphere is totally different.
Yeah, it looks much more intimidating. You see just a sea of red behind you as opposed to all the mix of the red with the blue or the white or whatever team you're playing.
Exactly, and the crowd is right on top of you. It just gets way louder in Carnesecca than it does in the Garden for sure.
Yeah, that's not going to change, unfortunately, but we should talk a little bit about the team this year. I mean, that win against Creighton reminded me a lot of what happened in December when we had the big win against West Virginia. They beat Arizona, so take me back to your minds at that point. After the West Virginia win, how high were your expectations for the year?
Yeah, so I think I came on the last time I came on your show was right after they had beaten Arizona. So it was late December, or actually early January. They were 11-2 in the non-conference, had a huge win against Arizona, a huge win against West Virginia. Those two teams who ended up being really top 15 teams in the country this season. The expectations were higher, I would say. They were raised a little bit. We came into the season kind of thinking this was going to be a team that was going to be right around 500. Somewhere in that 16 to 17 win area. And the expectations definitely got a little bit raised after those two wins. We saw what they were capable of, obviously. But the Big East is just a different animal, and we knew that going in. My goal was to get to 7 wins in the Big East. They're not going to do that, obviously. But at the end of the day, they are going to kind of end up finishing really right where we thought, in that 15, 16, right around 500 record type thing. But, the expectations were certainly raised. I thought there was a chance at an NCAA tournament bid if they continued playing well and if they got to that 7-8 win mark in the conference. Obviously, they didn't do that, and now it's just hoping to get in the NIT. But overall, for the season, the expectations, I would say, have been met.
Yeah, I would say so too. And it's interesting point. I talked about St. John's with a good friend, with our mutual friends of our podcast, Zach Braziller, last week, and he basically pointed out. He said that I asked him what went wrong in Big East play. He basically said it's not St. John's, it's the league. The league is too much for them. Do you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely, yeah. There's not one thing that you can point to that's gone wrong. I guess if you had to pick something, it would be they just didn't get the contributions that they hoped out of Mustafa Heron, a senior guard, and LJ Figueroa, a junior guard. Two guys who were second team preseason All Big East. Neither one of them have been, as good as we thought they would be. Heron's out for the year with an ankle injury as well. If there was one thing that went wrong, it would be that. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's just the conference is so tough, and this is a relatively young team. They've only got 2 seniors. One of them is Heron, who's not playing right now. Only have a few juniors. It's made up of a lot of freshmen and sophomores, and it's just a team that isn't able to close right now. If you look at their Big East record, they have 12 Big East losses right now, and I think about 9 of them they've been in the game, late in the second half. They just haven't been able to close these games. And the conference is going to send 7 teams to the NCAA tournament. So 70% of the league is going to go to the tournament. Those teams know how to close. Those teams are top 25 type teams. They're tournament type teams, and they know how to close. And St. John just hasn't learned that just yet. So nothing's really gone wrong, like you mentioned. It's just they haven't been able to close out games.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough when you're going every night. You got, Seton Hall's coming in, or we got to go to Creighton. We have Marquette. It's like, there's never an easy, okay, we're going to go pummel Northwestern, Nebraska, like you can get in the Big Ten, or some of these bottom tier SEC teams.
No, it's a completely different animal, like you mentioned. Yeah, that's why I think the Big East is the best conference in the nation this season, at least. The bottom of the Big East is St. John's, DePaul, and Georgetown, really. Those 3 teams could really beat anyone in the conference at any point. You saw that with St. John's. St. John's, the 9th-ranked team in the Big East right now in their standings, they not only beat Creighton, but they destroy Creighton. You don't see that in other conferences. The ACC is having a down year, obviously. The SEC has its really bad teams. And like you mentioned, the Big Ten has teams like Northwestern, like Nebraska, who aren't doing so well this year. The Big East is just a different animal this season. Anyone could beat anyone. And the bottom of the league would be, middle of the pack, I think, in a lot of other conferences this season as well.
I mean, even a team like DePaul, who never does anything. This year, there were points where you're sitting there wow, could DePaul make a tournament this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Going into conference play, I don't think it was crazy at all to think DePaul would be a conference team. They had the talent. They just kind of didn't deliver. And they kind of had the same issue with St. John's, just not being able to close games out. But, yeah, even DePaul, I think they only had 1 or 2 losses going into conference play as well. They were a team that people thought was going to be ranked heading into conference play. And, now they end up being last in the conference, but the talent is certainly there for them as well.
Yeah, indeed. And obviously, this is the first year of the Mike Anderson era. As somebody who's seen a lot more St. John's basketball I have, how do you think Mike Anderson's been doing this year?
I'm absolutely in love with the job that Mike Anderson has done. I can't say enough good things about him. I tend to be, I think, more of an optimistic fan with St. John's, maybe more optimistic than I should be given this program's last 2 decades. But I think for the first time in a while, they have a coach who's really building a culture. Mike Anderson is a college head coach. The last 2 guys, Chris Mullen, obviously, it was his first job, and Steve Lavin, you kind of wondered about the effort, and sometimes that's not the case with Mike Anderson. And you've seen that this season. Mike Anderson's team now is 8 games under 500 in the Big East. They've been consistently under 500, consistently near the bottom of the conference this entire season long. Yet every single game they've come out and they've competed with whoever they're playing. You look even this Wednesday or last Wednesday, they played Villanova on the road. They were right there in that game with Villanova for about 35 minutes on the road. As I mentioned earlier, they've been blown out in very, very few games this season. Their effort has never been a question with this team. He's certainly gotten this team to buy into what he's preaching. And now you just see for the future, what's he going to be able to build? Is he going to be able to get guys to stay along? LJ Figueroa, a guy that I mentioned before, is a junior. Is LJ going to grad transfer somewhere? He can do that. He can go pro if he wants. Is he going to get guys to stick around? I don't know. That's kind of been an issue for St. John's recently. But in terms of what he's built this season, the results on the court have not been great, but he has certainly built that culture that we haven't seen at St. John's really since Lou Carnesecca was here. So it's been a long, long time since they've had that type of culture that I think Mike Anderson has at least laid the foundation for this season.
Yeah, he's been doing a lot of work building that foundation. And, I mean, I think, I don't get me wrong, I think obviously this is not where you thought you would end up when you were 11-2 in the non-conference. I think they're still set up very well the next couple of years. Those young players starting to develop a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. And you look at guys on this St. John's team that Mike Anderson has developed that were getting really no playing time last season under Chris Mullen. Josh Roberts, a big guy. Greg Williams, who went off for 21 points yesterday, a career high. And Marcellus Erlington, big guy. Marcellus Erlington was actually a football player near my hometown. He comes in here. And those guys last year were really getting no playing time whatsoever under Chris Mullen as freshmen. And they looked like freshmen. They looked very, very raw, very, very lacking in talent and didn't really even look like Big East players, frankly. They come in this year under Mike Anderson, and all 3 of those guys have really turned into starting-level players in Williams, Roberts, and Erlington. That just kind of shows you the job that Mike Anderson has done. He's brought in a guy, Julian Champagny, who was really not even looked at as a potential recruit on anyone's radar. Champagny was going to go to junior college, actually, and play for a season. He comes to St. John's. He's going to end up being on the All-Big East freshman team this season, and I think should be in the competition for Big East Rookie of the Year as well. So that just kind of shows you the type of talent that Mike Anderson has been able to develop in really not even in a year on a job.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely great stuff. And I mean, like, obviously you're tapped in. Give me who is the St. John's MVP this season?
It's tough to say. You know, their most talented player has definitely been Figueroa, been LJ Figueroa. But even he, I mentioned at the front, you know, he has definitely had his struggles. I think all St. John's fans would say that this season has been a relative disappointment for him, given how his first season in Queens went last year. So Figueroa is their most talented player. I still think Figueroa down the stretch is the guy that you want taking those shots. But he's definitely had a roller coaster season. I'd put him up there. I'd put guys like I mentioned. Marcellus Earlington's really come out of nowhere for them. He's become really a scoring presence for them as well. Rasheem Dunn, who I haven't touched on, has been really an electrifying point guard for them. He can get to the basket. He's really been their only guy this season who can consistently get to the basket. Only problem is his decision making when he gets there isn't really fantastic. But no, overall, I would probably say it's Figueroa just because he's their most talented guy. But it hasn't been, you know, one single player for them like we've seen in the past with Shamori Pons, obviously. It hasn't really been that way this season.
Yeah, it has been that way this year. And as of recording right now, the bracket's not finalized. They are locked in the 8-9 game, probably against Georgetown. So they have I think they got a good shot to win that first game. What do you think their chances are to like make a little noise in the Big East tournament?
Yeah, well, you know, like we've been saying, anyone could really beat anyone in the Big East. I have never been more excited for a Big East tournament than I have this year. I really think you have 7 or 8 teams that could win this thing this season, and I don't think St. John's could win it, but they definitely have their shot against Georgetown. You know, their first time that they played Georgetown was back in early January. They got run out of the gym on the road. That was really one of the few games that they were not really competitive in. But then, on Super Bowl Sunday, they played Georgetown. They had a 17-point second-half lead that they couldn't hang on to in that game. So they can definitely compete with the Hoyas. And then if they win that game, who knows? They might get Seton Hall in the second round. In the number 1 seed, if Seton Hall wins on Wednesday against Villanova, we'll see. They've competed with Seton Hall. You know, they had a 13-point halftime lead against Seton Hall about a month ago in a game that they couldn't hang on to as well. We just saw them beat Creighton. They've competed with Villanova this season. So, you know, I think they can compete with anyone. Can they beat, you know, three of those teams in a row? Probably not. But I think that there's a chance they can win maybe two games at the most, I would say, and make it to Friday night. That would be the goal for me.
All right, last one from me. Just a gut based on like right now. Who do you think is going to win the Big East tournament?
Right now, I would probably pick Seton Hall. Still, I think they've been the most consistent team really all season long in the conference. You know, they had a little bit of a stretch where they were struggling a little bit, and then they get right back on track now. They've won a few more games in a row. So they've been the most consistent team, and they obviously have a lot of veterans on that team. Miles Powell, who I think is probably going to win the Conference Player of the Year. He's in the discussion at least. Romaro Gill, Quincy McKnight. They got a lot of veteran leadership. Sandro Mamukalashvili is another guy who's really stepped up for them and who was battling a wrist injury earlier in the season. He's kind of now come into form. They got a lot of talent, Seton Hall. They got a lot of veteran talent as well, which really, really matters this time of year. And they've just been the most consistent team. I think Creighton is a team that could win it, but as you saw yesterday, they are very reliant on hitting the three-pointer, and they went, I think, 4 of 24 yesterday from three-point range. So they can have a game like that when you're that reliant on a three. Villanova is always going to be in the discussion as well, but if I had to pick a team right now, it would probably be Seton Hall.
Yeah, I'm tending to lean that way as well. Troy, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how do people follow you on social media and keep up with the Seeing Red podcast?
Absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Troy Mauriello. That last name is Mauriello. I post every podcast there. We do one show every week, usually on Wednesday after their midweek game. So we do one a week. I do Periscopes as well after their weekend games. So you can check me out on there. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcast and on SoundCloud for the non-Apple users. Just search the Seeing Red podcast. It'll come up there. And, you can check me out there. We're going to keep doing shows. We only have a few weeks left of the regular season and the conference tournament, but then we do shows in the off season as well. You know, we try to have different types of guests on, you know, notable alumni, things like that. So, check it out if you haven't already. If you're a St. John's fan, I'll toot my own horn. I think it's a must listen for any St. John's fan. So, definitely check it out.
I would concur. Troy, thanks all the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
All right, that was Troy Mauriello talking some St. John's, a little Big East. We'll go dive deeper into the Big East tournament next with Vin Parisi, who's been calling Big East games all year for Fox Sports right after this.